coming here to speak. A couple weeks ago, I was, as with any group that you're going to get ready to speak to, I was a little bit curious as to, who the audience would be, because, when you're in Homeland Security, not everybody likes you all that well. But when I heard it was the Rotary, and I came in today and I heard a prayer and a pledge of allegiance, I knew that I was in a good place. I knew that I was among people that thought a lot like I did, and had a love of country and a love of God, and found that very important, as I did. And so I thought a lot about what I was going to say to you today about 9/11, because for all of us, I think we can all remember exactly where we were that day, 14 years ago. We can all remember, the very moment in time when we remember seeing the first plane crash into the building. And then maybe we were even there to see it on television live when the second plane hit. But there was a whole lot more that was going on that we weren't aware of. And there was a lot of reasons why we weren't aware of that. We didn't have the systems that are now in place to help try to prevent tragedy like that from occurring. So when we look at back at that day in reverence, we have to also think about where we were and what we were thinking and what we remember about the days before that. Because I can tell you personally, I don't remember much about the day before 9/11, but I sure remember the day of 9/11, and it's forever etched in my mind. I think back about that day. I was a fairly young sergeant in the Highway Patrol. My wife and I had just had our first child several months before that, and things were going pretty good for me. And I just happened to be at what we call riot training. It was our civil disturbance training out in Piqua, Ohio. And, we had troopers, probably as many troopers as we have people here assembled today. And those troopers were all geared up in all of their riot gear, ready to respond anywhere in the state for civil unrest and disturbances. And we train on that every year. We do this riot training to familiarize ourselves with the equipment and the process and all of those things. But that was the day that the planes fell out of the sky and hit the towers. And we were sitting there getting ready to be briefed up for the day, and it was early in the morning. It was about this time in the morning, matter of fact, when the first plane flew out of Massachusetts headed for the Pentagon. And I remember very clearly our captain coming in and pulling in a television set. And that was unusual to us. Usually we got a brief up from the captain on the day's order and what we were going to be doing and how we were going to be doing it. And now the captain was bringing in a television set, turning it on and rallying all the troopers around to watch and brief us up on what was occurring. At that time, we believed that it was just a plane crash into the first building, and that was the first report. But it didn't take very long, just moments later, as the television set was live, as we watched the second plane hit the tower. And I'm sure, like many of you, every trooper in that room went stone quiet, silent, looked at each other, and we all knew. We didn't have to say a word. We knew what was going on. We knew what had happened at that point, that it was an intentional act and that we were under attack. So there's a lot to be said between what happened then, what happened really before then, and really what's happened since. So I asked each of you, what do you remember about the day before 9/11? And how do you reflect on that as we move forward 14 years later as to what we're doing as a group here, assembled, in good spirits, trying to bring about camaraderie and advancing your community in a positive way, And how does that reflect upon our country? And I'm here kind of to make a little bit bigger point in talking about terrorism and 9/11, going a little bit further. So reflecting about where we were then. You know, that very day, the President of the United States went out to Ground Zero, or very shortly after, and he stated that freedom itself was attacked today. And I would say to you that we're still in that situation today, where each and every day we have to consider that our freedom, our way of life here in the United States is under constant attack. And that still is the case, whether it be from abroad or from our southern borders, our northern borders, or from within. And I'll talk to you a little bit about where we're at in just a moment. You know, the seal for Ohio Homeland Security, you know, it says many as one on it. And that's really meant to talk and speak to, you know, the governmental agencies that work together to try to secure and keep secure the state of Ohio and our nation. But the reality of it is none of it can be kept secure without individuals like yourselves and groups like the Rotary, who come together and communicate with each other in a positive way, have positive dialogue about what needs to be changed, whether it be right here in your local community or in the country. And so we need more of that in this country. And I speak to this because I don't think that for any of us it's any surprise that, you know, we've got to fix things in our country before we can be a leader abroad, before we can go out into other nations and display leadership and secure other nations. We have to do that right here at home, and it starts right here in Dublin. It starts in my old community of Hilliard, and where I live now in Marysville. It starts there, and it starts with good people coming together and affecting positive change. And they do that. We do that obviously here in Ohio and throughout the country because we have the best system, the greatest system on the face of the planet in our government. But we have to use it to our advantage. We have to utilize it in a positive way. So we have threats from within, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because the threats from abroad can be very difficult to and sometimes intangible for us here at home to wrap our arms around. Not always do we see ISIS fighters making their way here into Ohio and causing us issues here in Ohio. Is it possible? I can tell you that there are sympathizers here in the state of Ohio. They are throughout the country. You've probably seen the reports that have been made aware of nationally. For instance, reports just several months ago that as many as 75 individuals here in the United States that were at least declared by ISIS or ISIL to be infiltrated here in the United States to cause us harm. And those are only the ones that we're aware of. Those are the ones that we're aware of, that we have ideas and we have information on that are within our communities. They are traveling abroad. They are receiving training with the idea that they're going to come back to the United States and change our way of life and our system of government. And so, how do we start to secure those types of threats? Well, that's where it brings me back to right here at home, within Ohio, within our southern border, and ensuring that we've done the things that we need to here to make sure that we have a secure homeland. So for us here in Ohio, what does that mean? Well, oftentimes the folks at Ohio Homeland Security talk about crime. because crime within our own community and the lack of the rule of law is the very start to terrorist events and terrorists having a means in which they can carry out their deadly deeds. So we often say, well, not all terrorism is considered just a simple crime, but all crime can lead to terrorism. How does that happen? Well, individuals lead a lifestyle in which they believe that circumventing the rule of law is a proper method. And you see it in some of the anarchist groups that threaten and protest. And I'm here to tell you that, you know, the police out there in our communities are very diligent in not only ensuring public safety, but one of the avenues that gets underreported is the fact that they're oftentimes trying to protect the First Amendment rights of those individuals that are out there protesting. And so those police are putting themselves in a very precarious position trying to protect those that in a moment's notice can become disobedient, unruly, unlawful, and then they have to turn around and try to protect the rest of the citizens from that very same crowd. So it's a very dynamic and complex issue that we have to solve here in the United States when it comes to those threats from within. So when I talk about we have to solve some of those problems here in order to minimize the threats here in the United States, what I'm saying is that we have come from a nation that is largely a nation that follows the rule of law and understands our Constitution very well, to a nation where some of our children don't even know what the Constitution is and where it's derived from and where it comes from and what it means to us and how important it is to the rule of law. And that those rights that are inalienable to all of us are brought about not from man, but they're natural rights. They're things that we all naturally obtain from somewhere beyond ourselves. And when I hear of a prayer in the morning to open up a meeting, I know that a group like the Rotary understands that. And so we need individuals here to help carry out that message. What does that do? Well, that changes the culture from within. And that's our greatest lack of security here in the United States. And despite what some might say about other threats, such as global warming, I can tell you that today there are much greater threats to our culture and our way of life and to the American way. And they usually start from within. And they start to expand outward from there, whether it be starting in the home and the family or expanding out to our local government officials who at times may not have the best intentions for our state and our country. But I can tell you here in Ohio, good things are happening. And good things are happening because of good leadership at a lot of different levels that are putting things in place. Our economy is growing. People are in a better place than they were in 2008. And that's due to good leadership. But our security from that leadership has also increased. And things have been put in place to help with that. A couple of which I'll talk to you about. And I talked about crime. And we all know about ISIS and those things that are in the headlines quite a bit. But things that you don't think about that are risks to our critical infrastructure and pose a risk to our economy. Things that we put in place here in Ohio, such as a scrap metal theft system that allows for police in this state to look at a do not buy list and send that list to scrap dealers throughout the state, who are now required to register and report individuals with special purchases who are trying to sell special items to them. Things such as rail girders and industrial pieces. I'll give you a case in point, and I can't go into too many of the specifics on this, but to give you the idea of what kind of impact this has in the state of Ohio. Just a couple months ago, a vendor reported a high injection mold missing from his manufacturing plant. And law enforcement went out to investigate it, and they did some auditing and found out that there were actually 5 or 6 at that time, they determined, molds that came up missing. And if anybody has any idea of the costs of high injection molds, they aren't cheap. The total in revenue lost from just the molds themselves was over $200,000 from that one company. But what that law enforcement officer had at his disposal was a database and a registration access database that allowed him to determine that an employee within that company had tried to sell those special items at a scrap dealer here in Ohio. That investigation led to several other suspects being arrested, the recovery of all those molds, and likely saved, according to the business, who was losing money to their customers because they were not able to produce the products that they needed to produce, saved those companies in excess of $2 million, just in that one case alone. So we don't think of things like scrap metal theft as being an issue when it comes to our national security or our security here in the state. But what if that item is a critical part to a dam structure, or bridges that are being replaced or repaired, or items that are going into nuclear facilities or electrical grids? And we're seeing those kinds of components being stolen too. We're seeing individuals who are trying to steal copper, live wires, and getting killed in the process from trying to steal copper and other metallics throughout the state. So we're putting in things throughout Ohio that are dealing with that. So I want to talk a little bit about school safety. And we have superintendent from Dublin Schools here, and he probably is very well aware of some of the school safety things that the state of Ohio is trying to put in place, such as improving the school safety plan process for all the schools in the state of Ohio. What does that mean? Well, you know, many schools throughout Ohio have very, very good plans. And I know, for instance, Dublin is very well prepared and has their students well prepared to handle things in the event of an active shooter or a natural disaster or flooding or electrical being out, all those types of things. But there are many, many schools across the state who don't have a basic plan in place. That they have some information that they've pieced together and that they've supplied, but they don't really have a comprehensive plan, one that covers all of the things that they need to cover. And it doesn't mean that just because they have a plan that they're going to be safer, and we know that. But what the state of Ohio has done is said, hey, look, we need some minimum requirements so that when our kids go to school, we know that the school administrators have thought of certain things and have provided for the safety of those kids in the school. So that when you or I send our kids to the school each morning, we have a better idea that they're going to remain safe in the school. So we've done that here in the state of Ohio. And the infrastructure protection people at Ohio Homeland Security and the Department of Education are working specifically with schools on a daily basis, going out to those locations to make sure that their plans are in order. So I want to come back just a little bit to talk about 9/11, because that's why I'm here. And as we think back about that particular day, and we think about the headlines afterwards and the days following, and some of the quotes that I remember from papers around the country, the unthinkable has happened today. This is a day of terror. Something has happened beyond belief. Nothing will ever be the same. These are headlines from different papers across the country. So where are we today? Well, terrorists are still on a deliberate march. They're on a deliberate march to destroy the Western civilization. And it couldn't be any more real than that. But that's the reality for us. So what do we do about it? We have to do some things internally first. Starts with communities like Dublin, the Rotary Club, making change. Things on our southern border, big topic. And you've seen politicians around the country talking about the southern border. We're going to have a very difficult time here in the United States identifying terrorists that are within our borders if we don't solve the problem on the southern border. And to another point, the northern border. These are vulnerable areas to which we have individuals crossing the border where at first glance we have no idea who these individuals are. And so we've got to start doing something about that on a national level. So what can we do here in the state of Ohio when it comes to that? Well, there are things that are very controversial, things like automatic plate recognition readers that have been a tool for law enforcement for some time that help identify individuals that come through our state. You know, Ohio has, as you know, one of the greatest transportation systems in the country. And you may not believe that when you drive down some of the roads, but the reality of it is that when you look at other states, we have a large and diverse and very dynamic transportation system going east, west, north, and south. And as a result of that, we have a great deal of individuals that we know travel through our state that want to cause us harm. One of the things that Ohio Homeland Security, working with federal partners, is doing is working on the terrorism watch list. And many of you may not be aware, but Ohio is one of the leading states in the country where law enforcement has encounters with individuals on the terrorism watch list. And we usually rank in the top 5 for all law enforcement having encounters with these individuals. So what we're doing in the state today is we're working very hard to continue to vet through that list, to determine any associates that may be accompanying or being involved with those individuals on the terrorism watch list, and making sure that Ohio moves forward with a process in which we are more secure, that we are watching out for the citizens of the state, and that we are watching our own borders on a continuous basis. One of the things that probably goes unnoticed, many times we don't see this very often, and I can speak to this because we have this university that some of you may have heard of that have been on a winning streak for a while called Ohio State. And each Saturday we have hundreds of thousands of people around the shoe, and Homeland Security and local law enforcement is working very diligently to make sure that that stadium and all the occupants stay safe there. Some of the new threats that are that we're seeing when it comes to large venues like Ohio State and Ohio Stadium is unmanned aerial surveillance systems. And this is going to be a new threat that we see emerging here in the United States, and we're seeing it abroad. Some people call them drones or UASs, but these can be used for very good purposes, and of course they can be used for very nefarious purposes. Some of the things we're already seeing here in the United States is we're seeing these drones being flown into buildings. We're seeing them interacting with aircraft at the airport. And so this is something that Ohio is working very hard to try to get our arms wrapped around how we deal with these unmanned aerial surveillance systems. Because there's going to be more of them, there's going to be greater payloads. Some of you may have seen where now there's individuals placing firearms on the surveillance systems. And so this is going to be a challenge for local law enforcement and for our communities to deal with these types of things in the future. So just to wrap this up and to answer any questions that you might have, I want to let you know that it's not all grim. And I paint a picture where, after 14 years, there's a lot of dangers out there for our country and for our state. But the thing that's the highlight for me is something that happened yesterday that happens every month. And that is that local law enforcement, federal officials, and partners throughout the state come together on a monthly basis at Ohio Homeland Security. And we had a meeting yesterday and a brief up yesterday that shows the collaboration that's going on in the state of Ohio. That shows that our federal partners, unlike before 9/11, now after 9/11, and continue to this day to work together in a better way to try and secure the state of Ohio. We talk a lot more. We have systems in place to communicate a lot better. It's not a perfect system because there are challenges along the way. But what we have is we have much better communication and teamwork on the law enforcement side, the federal side, and the Homeland Security side throughout the country. And so we're in a great place to continue to improve that for the state of Ohio. So with that being said, I'll answer any questions that you might have. Yes?